Hey, welcome back to Writers of Silicon Valley. I'm your host, Patrick Stafford, and thank you for joining me. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. If you're a new listener, welcome for the first time. I am sorry for the delayed update. It's been a couple of months since the last episode. I was traveling overseas for LavaCon, and it has been a pretty busy period, so I do apologize, but I'm back with another episode now. And this one is for anyone who is looking for a job in design. Now, I have to say, this is one of the most innovative things I've seen in publishing in a while. So today, my interview is with Margo Stern, and she has written a book called Good Job. Now, on the one side, you see that it's all about for people who are going into design interviews. So if you're a candidate and you are going for an interview, the book is all about how to ace that interview. However, if you flip the book, it is also for hiring managers. So this part of the book is for people who are designing the interview process. And I have to say, I'm really charmed by the nature of this book, but also it's a fantastic book, and the advice in here is incredible. So today, my interview was with Margo, and we talk about what it's like to interview for a design role, how the interview process has changed, what the job market is like right now for design. And is it really as bad as people say? And if you manage to get an interview, how can you ace it? What are some of the mistakes that you should avoid? Margo has done, not only is her experience enough to write this book, but she's also spoken to a range of content designers and designers in general for this. So there's some really great advice here. So I'd highly recommend you pick up the book, and I'll link to where you can do that in the show notes. But it's a fantastic interview today. I have no other updates. As always, you get 20% off courses and workshops through UX Content Collective. So head over to uxcontent.com. We just added a new course selector quiz, which I'll link to. So answer a couple of questions, and you'll get a personal recommendation for the course or workshop that we think you should take. Apart from that, I have nothing. So let's go on to my interview with Margo. It's really a fantastic one, and I'll see you at the end. But I do think just to start with, I think it's interesting that the interview hasn't really changed all that much in my view. I mean, maybe you can challenge me on this, but this is something that has been around for, I don't even know when the modern sort of job interview really started. I guess in the corporatization of the last half of the 20th century. It's obviously the technology around it has changed, and there might be, the scanning of the resume when you submit, and so on. But I'm talking about the actual interview process of asking questions and answering them. Hasn't really changed all that much in my view. But you tell me, do you think that's different after doing this book?
I think it has. I think it has changed and it has evolved. I think there's a lot more, some more consistency that we see, especially across big tech companies, right? You see the star interview format. And I talk about that a lot in the book because I think it's really useful, even, which is like situation, task, action, and result. I think that's really useful because what it is it's setting yourself up to tell your experience as a story and as a narrative. And I think framing both sides of the table as a narrative, how are we at this one thing, and how are we going to talk about, how are we at this moment in time where you have a need and I might be able to fill that need, and what is it about that, my experience or my interests or my curiosity or my strengths or my skills, that is going to be a really good match to what it is that you're looking for and how you got to this point of this opening. So I do think that there is I'm seeing more consistency, that people are more about telling stories and hopefully having interesting conversations. I would also hope that in the last 20, 50 years, there are more programs in place, that there's more equity and diversity and inclusion, that those are intentionally designed into the interview process, not just the screening process, but the interview process. And people are more aware of kind of what their own biases are. And so I think hopefully there's more opportunity than there has been in the past, and more more openness than I think in the past, where it's like you see more homogeny in hiring.
Yeah, obviously the design space has a huge. I was just speaking to someone actually about a large technology company, which I will not name. They're not a Fang, but they or a Mang, I guess they're called now. But this person was saying that this company only really hires from SaaS companies, and they prefer like a certain set of people. And it reminded me of law firms because there are, large law firms that will only hire from the Ivy League, or here in Australia, they'll only hire from Melbourne University or
Yeah.
whatever. And it is interesting that there are still these norms and these expectations. And you still hear, ridiculous stories about. I just spoke to someone recently who interviewed at Apple and had, I think, like a double-digit rounds
Yeah.
of interviews.
Yeah.
So these, yeah, like it is good that these advancements are happening, but there are still some pretty entrenched processes and rules that honestly have no reason to exist. Really,
No, I mean, Google used to check SAT scores.
really, I didn't know
Oh
that.
yeah, 100%. Google used to check
Yeah,
your
wow.
SAT scores. I know a person who is still at Google who initially was turned down for a full-time job about 12 years ago because she had gone to a community college, right? And she went to a community college not because she couldn't have gotten in to a 4-year university. It was because she came from a lower middle class background, right? And so it was just like
Yeah,
discrimination, pure and simple. So
yeah,
I'm glad to see there's been a lot more evolution and inclusion. I mean, there's still, I think, that same sort of discrimination as you're talking about. Like, there's companies that won't hire this or won't consider this. It's unfortunate, but I also feel like let them. Like, they're self-selecting their
right.
workforce, And it's
Yeah,
like, do you want to work for a company that is going to be all Ivy Leaguers? Is that interesting to you as a designer to like have such like insular perspectives? For me, that's not what I'm interested in. If I'm like, but again, I
yeah.
want to, create large scale consumer products. So it can be like a self-selecting process if they're doing things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into this book. Let's get into the actual interviewing portion of it. So I think we know why people hate interviews. Obviously, it's nerve-wracking.
Mm,
You're being questioned about your expertise.
mm,
You're racking your brain trying to remember everything that you've ever done and portraying it in a right way. It's people feel as though they're very comfortable doing the work, but when it comes to actually selling themselves, it becomes
yeah.
very, very difficult. I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering, is there anything that really stood out in your interviews about why the I mean, interviews for this book, not job interviews. Is there anything that stood out from people about why the interview process is so um, uh, scary for
Yeah,
people?
I think it's exactly what you're talking about. That I think doing the job and interviewing for a job are two different jobs that have nothing to do with one
Mm,
another. Kind of reminds
mm,
me of running for president, right? Like the idea of being able to
yep.
campaign and like be someone who gets votes is a very different job and a very different skill set than actually like doing the job as president. And just like you didn't magically learn how to do your job, that you trained and developed skills for it, you can also train and develop skills for interviewing. And
Yep.
a lot of those, training and developing skills has to do with researching, with self-reflection, with preparation. So you're not just showing up and kind of being fully unprepared for whatever, comes at you and for it feeling like an interrogation. Because I think that's
Yeah.
where that feeling comes from, where you're like, I am being just assaulted with questions that I'm unprepared to answer, or I feel
Yeah.
like I'm on the back foot. The more that a candidate can do to do some self-reflection about their strengths, and talking about stories and experiences that specifically talk to success in those strengths, the better and more confident they will feel. And also rehearsal, right? Being used to like, I know how to
Yeah.
tell this particular story, or I know how to tell this particular story about this project that I worked on, focusing on one angle versus another angle.
Mm,
I also think that fewer interviews are better. And I don't mean like the interview process, because you can't really control that as much as we would like to. But going after, being more selective about what jobs you're applying for and what jobs
Hmm.
you'll accept interviews for or take an interview
Yeah.
for. I don't believe it's a numbers game. I do believe it's about recognizing kind of what your strengths, skills, interest, and curiosity lies, and going after and pursuing the jobs that match that versus saying, oh, this is almost adjacent, to what I would like, or I feel like I
Yeah.
could convince myself to do this job. Now I recognize that's like totally speaking from a point of privilege and being able to say like, oh, I can choose this job or I can choose that job. But I think searching from a place of desperation is going to lead you to make desperate choices. And that's going to lead you to feel bad in the interview and ultimately not successful at the job as well.
I mean, it's about sales, right? Like it's very similar to a sales process where you're targeting prospects. You don't necessarily target a million potential clients who might have varied interests in whatever. You pinpoint and you be very specific about who you're targeting and why. You're more likely to have success that way, I think.
I think that's right. And I think also genuinely believing in your product, right? Like I think that, and to be clear, the product is you as a candidate, right? And knowing what it is about you as, as a product, as a person, as a worker, as a designer that makes you particularly suited to the task or the problem at hand. And the more you can be genuine about that and truly believe what you're selling and truly believe what you're good at, the more kind of interesting conversations and successful interviews you'll have.
I mean, it is hard, right? Because interviews are naturally predisposed to select for confident candidates. And when I say confident, I don't even necessarily mean confidence in your abilities. I just mean confidence in your projection. If you are an affable, talkative, charming, well presented person, these are, I guess what I'm trying to say is this: extroverts have the advantage because you go in and you can be very charming and I'm a social introvert, so I'm an introvert at heart, but I'm very social. I love talking to people, and I love engaging with people, and that can be a fantastic way to enter an interview because you feel like it's just a conversation. Whereas if you saw someone who's a little bit more reserved, a little bit shy, you are kind of on the back foot, I feel like.
Yes. Also, but I mean, extroverts can also get into a place where they have so much confidence that they can come off as arrogant, right?
Oh yeah, we'll get to that.
Yeah,
don't worry.
Yeah, and this is where the other side of the table comes in. Like you want to create a space and know how to create questions that are not going to discriminate against introverts. Right. So you want to be asking questions as a hiring manager that is going to create a space to elicit those really interesting stories where a candidate can really show what it is they're about. And when you get even the most introverted introvert talking about a thing that they love or that they nerd and geek out about, they come through. Their personality and their passion comes through. And that's what you want to match. That's what you want to find.
Yep.
There's a really interesting improv, like business improv exercise where it's like talk about your job and talk about how it relates to the thing that you love. And what you see is that and your thing that you love might be your hobby. Like I like open water swimming and I use it as an analogy all the time. So when I talk about content design as it relates to open water swimming, I get more animated about it. And so it's the same idea, which is if you can find a way to have a candidate talking about what they love to do, specifically within their job skill set, you're going to see that passion. You're going to see that those interests and skills come through and see if it's a match. So then, even introverts can get good jobs.
Oh yeah, I mean, like this is something I was going to mention in the. I'll get to the first section of the book in a minute because I want to talk about actually going for interviews, and then we'll talk about people hiring. But I think one of the things as a hiring manager that you definitely notice right away is that confidence is an easy way to mask incompetence. And people feel as though if they are confident and they are, very agreeable, that it's going to hide the fact that actually their case studies and their responses to interview questions aren't really saying all that much. And it can be, you have to sort of watch out for it. But we'll get to that. But I want to talk in this section where you're talking about preparing for an interview. Now, we can't possibly talk about everything. I think that's a testament to the way you've created this book, is that it's full of extremely practical tips. So it's like very subheading. You'll be asking a question, and they'll be giving practical advice. I want to talk about case studies. Mm-hmm. Because this is the biggest problem that I see in the portfolios that come to UX Content Collective. Mm-hmm. The case studies are just not good. Mm. And you obviously give some pretty good advice in here about the STAR method and so on. I think people, number one, they leave out way too much about what the project was like to experience. So I see a lot of, I was asked to do this and I was asked to do this, but I'm like, okay, but what was the context? Like, what was was this coming with a deadline? Were people frustrated? Were you having to work with other teams and so on? Show me what it was like to be in your shoes. Mm-hmm. And that you don't get that from a lot of case studies. So obviously case studies are hard to do. What's going on with case studies? Why are they so bad?
I think there's two things. One, I think to your point, like people may make it very fact-based, right? Where actually like a case study has an opportunity to be kind of like an action adventure film, right? Like tell me what happened, set the scene. You are the hero. You're the protagonist of this story. What were you excited about? And then what happened? What was the plot twist that like made it really hard? That like, what was the obstacle that you had to overcome? Was it a deadline? Was it a difficult person you were working with? Was it like sudden big like CEO feedback? Like what is it that you overcame? And then what happened as a result of that? And telling that story makes a much more interesting story. But it also shows your skills beyond the kind of like hard skills of like, I made this thing and I designed this complex thing, to also, this is how I can overcome friction or obstacles or odds stacked against me. So I think framing it as more of a story and a narrative, even though I think the points you're going to hit, situation, task, action, and result are all going to be there, bringing in a little more life and personality to it, about you and how you approach this and what you overcame, I think can make it a lot more interesting. I also think that case studies are not one size fits all. For each individual job that you are applying to, you may want to tweak your case study for it to be about why this particular problem is the right case study, or why you're showing it for this particular job, highlighting or focusing or pulling focus to one particular angle or another. The other part is, don't put in a case study that you think is impressive or that you think that is going to impress other people, and doing it to kind of highlight that, or like showing some big metrics, especially if it's something you don't care about. I was interviewing someone who was potentially looking for a job, and he's like, well, I worked on this big thing and it was at scale. And I could just tell by the tone of his voice, he was not into the work. And I said, would you want to do that kind of work again? And he said, oh no, it was really boring. And I said, then don't make it a case study. He's like, oh, but it saved the company billions of dollars. And I said, great, then you can make it, a line item in something. But if it's not the kind of work that you want to do again, if it doesn't show your strengths, your skills, your passion, then it's not, then you're not, that's not going to come across when you're, either putting the case study together or talking through it.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about case studies is, number one, well, first of all, you give a really good piece of advice in the book where you say, this is more about presenting the case study, but it also applies to writing it, I think, where you say, people use the word we too much. So, we did this or we did that. And it's actually something that I hear from people who go on interviews. They'll say, oh, they wanted to hear more about what I did or what I individually did. And I think that's a real challenge for people, is having to balance showing, okay, what did I do, but also acknowledging that this is a team. So how do people balance that?
I heard both sides when I was doing research for the book, that some interviewers wanted to hear it we, because if they focus too much on I, then they're centering themselves too much in the story and they're going to be difficult to work with. And then the inverse, like exactly what you said, which is like, okay, we, what did you do? What was your contribution? So I think it is a good balance. What I like to do and what I recommend is kind of in that setup slide of the case study, show off who you worked with, right? Like it doesn't need to be their names, but like indicate what was the context of the team that you were working with. And you can also say, okay, this is how we approach it. This is what I did. Here's what we did next. When we were in research, I worked with the UX researcher to frame what the actual candidate profile was going to look like. So I think it needs to be a balance, because I agree. If it's too much on we, as an interviewer, I'm like, it sounds like you're hiding something. And then if it's like,
where are
me,
you
me,
in
me,
this?
I, we can't do design work alone. So what did your collaboration model look like?
Yeah, I like that. I think something I just wanted to mention before that, though, is you mentioned about wanting to highlight your strengths and highlight what type of work you want to do and so on.
Yeah.
One thing that I think people try to do too much is they'll look at a company, let's say Netflix, right? And I want to go work at Netflix and blah, blah, blah. They'll try to be too subtle in showing off that their skills relate to what Netflix is doing. They're kind of like and I'm just like, just mention it. Just say straight up, I know that Netflix is doing this or is moving in this direction. I really love this and I want to support it doing XYZ. I don't know why people hold back. Maybe because it feels like it's too, like, it's being too much of a showboat, or they're trying to be too clever. But as someone who's hired people before, I can tell you, no one says anything about the direction of the company or sort of acknowledges their knowledge of the company. So being able to have someone say, okay, well, I read your financial results and I know you're focusing on this. I think I could really help there, is refreshing to see that, as long as it's honest, of course. But yeah.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I don't think you can do too much homework. Okay, wait, that's not true. You can do too much homework. You can, don't fully go down the rabbit hole of like every single person that you're interviewing with and like stalk them and like looked at their
Totally.
like LinkedIn, fine, Instagram, no, like, I don't know, when people bring up specific details of my life or where they've seen me, or like it feels really
weird.
It's super weird. And I'm like, okay, it's an imbalance of intimacy, right? Of how much you know about me versus I know about you. And it makes me feel uncomfortable. But I think you're exactly right that like the more homework you can do, the more you can relate to what the company needs, to what you can offer. It's selling yourself in a way that's genuine. And it's also making the hiring manager's job so much easier, which is like, oh, I'm doing matchmaking. I understand. It's really clear to me not only why this person is the right person for the job, but that they are really genuinely interested in doing their homework and they care about this thing. And they're not just like applying to everything that's out there. They're interested in this role. It's less about, I want to work here. And it's more about why my skills are suited to the problem that you're trying to solve. Right. And it's much less about me and my needs and more about like you and your needs and what you're looking for. And the more information that you can get from the hiring manager, from the job description, from all of your conversations, the more you can say, this is how I'm the answer to the problem that I hear you're sketching out. Right. So I don't think there's harm in that.
The story I'm thinking about is this person goes into an interview and they start talking about their side hustle and how much they love their side hustle and how they come to work at 9 o'clock and then they leave at 5 and they go and work on their side hustle. And the company they're hiring for is McKinsey. Now, obviously, there's nothing wrong. I highly encourage a side hustle. Like, I did a side hustle for many years, and pretty much acted like that. I went in at 9, left at 5, and worked on my side hustle on the off time. But I think there's a case there for matching the message to the listener. I thought that was a really interesting anecdote.
Yeah, I mean the TLDR of that one is like McKinsey's gonna need you to work all the time, right? Yeah. And so it's like, and that's
it's kind of like whether you like it or not. Like that's what you're going into.
That's what you're going for, and you're going to do that work and to be on call and to have that experience and have that on your resume. And like, I think maybe what that candidate was going for was like, look how dedicated I can be. I can even have like a side hustle outside of a job. I can work all these crazy hours, but I think it was like, cool. That's not what we need. And also I think for the interviewer, it indicated that this candidate was much more interested in everything outside of their job than in their job. And when you have your job, you need to explain like what it is that your skills and your strengths and your interests, how that lines up with the job that you're going to be doing 40 hours a week.
Yeah. I think one of the things that people get wrong in interviews, I've certainly made this mistake, and design interviews specifically, people will ask things like, can you describe something that you would do differently? or
Mm.
can you describe how another way you might go about this? And I think sometimes in design interviews, the a lot of people go in with an understanding or a preconception about how they want to answer things, and
Mm.
I personally I'm always looking over my mistakes and things I could have done differently. So I
Yeah.
cherished the opportunity to say, well, if I had more time, I would have done X, Y, Z. Or if I could have done this, I would have done this instead, or and so on and so on. I'm interested in your view on the way you answer these types of questions, because I can say that as someone who's hired people in the past, I want people who have a strong point of view, but I also want it to be flexible. And sometimes I feel people can go into design interviews with I need to do this, or I this is the way to do it. I'd be curious about your thoughts on that and whether that's come up in these types of
Yeah,
in your research for the book.
it's interesting. Like that kind of, I think, hmm, it's a tough question to answer. I think the question of like, how would you do this differently is a tough question to answer because I think people do have their stories set. And I think it's really good for you to have a story set. But I also think that the best interviews are not interrogations, and it's not like one person talks and another person talks, right? Like it
Yeah.
should be like genuine, like I mean, the best interviews are good conversations.
Yeah.
And if if that can continue the conversation to be an interesting question answered interestingly, like if there's good rapport there, if there's empathy on both sides of the table, if people are matching like the tone and the energy of who they're talking to, I think it
Mm.
can be a fair question. But it is a tough one because I think when you get set in your story, I don't know. I mean, maybe people then in those moments could speak to the challenges that they faced,
Hmm.
right? That kind of plot twist moment and say like, okay, if this thing hadn't happened, maybe I would have approached this differently.
What are the biggest mistakes you think people are making in design interviews? Like, what stands out after doing all this research and talking to all these people and being in them yourself? Like, what stands out as like the biggest mistake people are making?
I'm going to answer it in both ways. I'm going to answer it from the hiring manager side. I'm going to answer it from the candidate side because that's what
Yep.
I really believe in, that it's from both sides. From the hiring manager side, it's the mistake that I made when I first started writing this book and going right to job descriptions, right? And saying, okay, this is how to write a job description that doesn't suck.
Yep.
Where what you really need to do is understand what the job is to begin with, and doing some like real research about what are the skills that are required for this job, who is this person going to be working with, and really thinking in depth about how you're going to assess a candidate, and not just saying, okay, they need 3 to 5 years experience with this kind of thing. Like, and really, I'm not speaking to the qualifications, but speaking more to what they will be doing rather than what they have done.
Yep.
So I think doing your research and really understanding what the job is truly that you're hiring for, and that you're not saying, oh, I just need to have an L4 content designer. What does this one need to do?
Yeah.
Right. So that's the biggest mistake there, is kind of going directly to the job description. On the candidate side, I think it is taking that one size fits all approach and telling the same story over and over again, and
Yeah.
not really thinking how to reframe or refocus some experience or interest or strength to this particular job.
Mm.
I think that people get stuck in a rut, and they're used to telling a particular story and like trotting out a particular narrative in a particular way. And I think you can have, one case study that you tell 3 different ways, but making
Sure.
sure that which adventure you're choosing.
Yeah.
So I think it's for both sides, it really comes down to a little bit more preparation.
Yeah.
And I
And
think that can
customization,
sound
right?
customization, exactly. And I think that can sound scary. That can sound like a lot of work. Oh, interviewing is already so much work and so time consuming. That's why I think people should be doing less of it. I
Mm.
want to see, less applying for any job, again, that you might be relatedly right for, and really choosing like one at a time, two at a time, that you are really hopeful, that you are really, truly, honestly a good match for. And
Yeah.
same thing on the hiring side, like stop making your poor recruiter screen 20 people a week when they should have a strong idea, because you've developed that strong idea of who is the right person for this job. What are the skills and the strengths that you're looking for?
I can tell you that, from my perspective as someone who's hired people, I don't go in with the perspective of this person's starting at 100 points and every mistake they make, I'm sort of like knocking off a point. I think that's sometimes you go into an interview as a
Oh
candidate
yeah.
thinking that's the case. It's
Yeah.
actually not. I want a I hate the word unicorn, but I want a unicorn. You know what I mean? Like I want
Mm.
someone who is gonna. I want you to show me all the good stuff. You know what I mean? So when you say things, I'm adding points. You know, like
Yeah.
I'm adding
Yes.
points to that person's
Yes.
tally card. And so in our advice to students, I like saying that you want to give opportunities or make opportunities for those people to give you points. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that can even just be like a comment here or there about when you're presenting a case study and you're talking about a particular technique or something, just say like, oh, I noticed you also put that in, you know, your latest update, or I noticed that you're moving towards this sort of thing. So that's one where I'm like, okay, they know what they're talking about. They're looking at the product and they understand it.
Yes.
And it's those types of I guess you could call them charismatic moments, I suppose, but it's just those little touches that really elevate what might be like a fairly run of the mill case study into
Yes.
something very memorable. You know, you want to walk
Mm-hmm.
out and have them go like, "Oh, you want them to not stop thinking about you, basically." And it
Yes.
doesn't take much to do it. Just a sprinkling of those little moments can do it.
And I don't, and the way that you're talking, I mean, like, I don't think that it's not sneaky to do it. You should be really doing it from a
No,
place of genuine interest, right? Like you are
yeah,
going after this role, you've done the research, and the more that you found out about it, and the more you found out about the company, the more of tidbits you're like, oh, I'm really excited about this thing or this thing or this thing.
yeah.
And that's why it becomes like a genuinely fun conversation.
Yeah, it's so obvious when people just fake it and they're trying to sort of portray something as something they're not. I'm like, just just be normal. Just be normal.
It's a
Just be
tall
yourself.
ask.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah.
But I think like people can like I know that when I interviewed at the beginning of my career, I was so nervous and so
Mm.
formal and so stiff
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
you are kind of just you work yourself up and
Yeah.
you can start saying things that you would never say. And
Yeah.
um and look, obviously I understand, you know, you especially if you are in a situation as you mentioned before, like if you've been laid off and you don't have a choice about
Yeah.
where to go and what to do.
Yeah.
But I can promise in those situations that just being a little bit more yourself will actually move in your favor and make people remember you.
Absolutely. And I think, doing some rehearsal of your case studies and getting them, getting comfortable with telling the stories, whether it's just firing up a Zoom link to no one
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just getting used to like talking to the little green dot, or, your partner or your roommate or whoever, just like, I just need to work on telling you this story.
and timing,
And
timing. You mentioned in
yes.
there that like
Yeah.
you people have seen senior candidates run out of time. To me, that's just like at a junior level, I would kind of be like, okay, that I would sort of be a little bit more accepting of that. At a senior level, come on, that's like going over time at a conference. You need to have practiced this.
Lock it up. I agree. And that to me is an indication like you've been given a certain amount of time to answer a question, to present a case study, to present your portfolio. That should indicate to you the level of detail that you need to be going into, right? And if
Mm,
you're going into like every single last metric and every single last iteration and you're going way too into the weeds and not considering like what is this laddering up to, what story is this telling, then yeah, you're going to run out of time and you're going to lose your audience.
yeah, yeah.
And losing your audience means probably losing the interview, right? Because the whole point is to kind of like keep that connection afloat and keep that conversation going.
Yeah, as you said before, like you're telling a story, you know, and a story should have some emotional resonance at the end. So you
Yeah.
should really figure out, okay, what emotion do I want people to feel after reading this case study or looking at it?
Mm-hmm.
And what are the points I need to make to support that
Yeah.
outcome? I
Mm-hmm.
think but this obviously isn't made any easier by the fact that a lot of companies design terrible interview processes, which is the other half of the book. And you made a good point before about knowing the job. I'll tell you a story. The best interview I've ever been in, and it was for PricewaterhouseCoopers, ironically enough, because I went in and you know it's PwC, so I was wearing suit and tie, and I'm in the lobby, and it's for their digital consultancy. And a guy walks up to me in gym clothes, and like he's just been at the gym, and he goes, "Patrick," and I'm like, "Yep." He goes, "Come with me." And so I follow him, and already I'm like, "What is going on?" And we sit down in a boardroom, and he goes, "Do you want a beer?" And I'm like, "This is in like 2 o'clock in the afternoon." I'm like, "No," and I'm like, he's like, "Yeah, no, I won't either, but I had to offer." And I was like, "Okay." And so he sits down and he goes, "I'm going to tell you everything that sucks about working here, and I'm going to tell you everything that's good about working here, and you can decide if you want the job or not." And I was like, this is the weirdest interview I've ever had, but it was
super
great
weird.
because he was like, "This is your second interview. I assume you're qualified." So he's like, "I'm going to tell you what it's like." And he told me straight up, he's like, "You'll work with a lot of interesting people. You'll get access to a lot of great companies. You will learn a lot." He said, "There's also a lot of politics and a lot of backstabbing, and you're going to have to play the political game to get ahead." And, that was the long and the short of it. But I just thought, what a refreshingly honest. I took the job. Was there for a year, and he was right. But like I felt like I got a sense of what it was like to work there.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem with so many processes. You just don't. Everyone wants to put their best foot forward, but you don't get a sense of what it's like to actually work there. I'm wondering, your take on this after writing this book.
That is a fascinating story, and like I have a million questions back for you, which is like, well, first, like, did you take the job, and like, is everything you said true? I would have, as a candidate, I would have wanted to corroborate his story. Like, I would not have let that be the last interview. Like, I would have gone back to my recruiter and saying, "Oh, that was really interesting. I learned so much. Is there anyone else I can talk to?"
It wasn't the last interview.
Good. Okay. That's really, really fascinating. I do think that interview processes can indicate a lot about company culture. And I think how you are treated in an interview can be indicative of how you'll be treated as an employee.
Tell me more about that. Do you have a story?
Yeah, I mean, I have been, and I've heard many stories that corroborate this. There is, of the FANG, Mang companies, often a very protracted interview process that can feel unclear where you are in the process. You're not sure what's happening. Every time you show up, it's different. There's no clear indication. The conversations themselves might be fascinating and really interesting, but you're still like you never have a core sense of like what it is that you'll be doing and working on and who with. And that, from what I understand, is very indicative of what it's like to work there, right? It's intellectual, it is cerebral, it is ambiguous, and that can be great for people, or that can be really frustrating for people. On the other hand, there are other places that are a lot more regimented, and you know exactly where you are, and they set really clear expectations about what's going to happen, and there is maybe a sense of more fairness about that, and a stronger sense of process. That also may indicate what it's like to work there. So I think listen for the red flags, or look for the red flags. And then also look for those green flags too, and be like, "Oh, this is interesting," or "This is different. Is this different in a way that works with who I am as a designer and who I am as a worker and my values, and the kind of place where I can be successful?"
Yeah. I often find you're not going to get a good, well, at least you might not get a trustworthy indication of what it's like to work there just in the interview process itself. Like, yes, there will be some clues. The thing that is often better is finding people who work at the company, or knowing, like, if you look on LinkedIn and you see like someone knows someone who works there, often connecting with that person and just saying like, "Hey, look, just be real with me. Like, I'm in this interview process. Like, what do you think?" And a lot of the time you're going to get some pretty honest. Now, sometimes that doesn't work because in different companies there are different cultures, and so different teams have different perspectives, and some people will say, "Oh, well, it's great in the data engineering team, but I'm in design and it's terrible," or whatever. So that you can't always take that as gospel, but it is a good indication as to whether there are problems, or even things like, I don't know about Glassdoor. Like, I go back and forth because like it often like I know that there are companies who will say like, "Oh, everyone give us a good review on Glassdoor," and stuff like that. And then you see people who give one star, and I'm like, pretty sure you were fired for good reason. You know what I mean? Like, or something like that. So it's hard to sort of guess or understand what's going on there.
It's all tricky, right? I think you need to get like you need to get many different inputs to make an informed decision, right? And I think it's not bad to look at LinkedIn and Glassdoor, but I think looking at them with a lens of what is the motivation? Why is this person posting in this particular way, right? The people who are motivated to write reviews are people who are motivated to write reviews. And that may be because they're having a great time or because they're having a terrible time. It's kind of like Yelp reviews, right? Like everything ends up being 3 stars because people are either like, this was terrible or this was the best thing ever. And then ends up kind of like averaging out. I'm also not a fan of I have merch that I've designed that, says LinkedIn is a trash fire. Order a book and you can get it.
It's true.
It's true. Because it's like if you listen too much to the LinkedIn, like it's an outrage machine of its own.
Yeah.
Right. And people post these long posts either because, what is their motivation? Why are they doing it? Are they building their brand? And people also, often like to post that the sky is falling on LinkedIn. And that isn't always the case. People don't always post their wins about getting a new job or how that happened or the connections, because it might seem like bragging, or they go on LinkedIn and everyone's talking about how they've been out of work for 18 months and they don't want to, make everyone else really sad or make them feel bad. So I think considering all of the inputs is really, really important. And then also the thing that you can control are the questions that you ask in an interview.
Totally.
And I like to ask, have a list of questions. I like to ask the same maybe set of questions to many different people, and you get a really good read, and they are open-ended questions that are not like gotcha questions ever. Something like, what keeps you up at night? What are you most proud of working here? Questions like that, they're a bit open-ended, and you ask them to the same people and you get a bit more of a complete picture of what's really going on there.
Totally. And I found that in my experience, if people are honest about where they're coming from, it just makes for a much more genuine conversation. Like I've been in interviews where the candidates said, look, I am not afraid of hard work, but I have these responsibilities out of work. How often could I expect to work past, 6 p.m. or whatever? It's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. Like, I don't feel like people should be afraid. And this is the thing. A lot of people are afraid of asking questions because they're afraid of the answer. But in those cases, if you're afraid of the answer, then you don't want to work for that company anyway, because that is not the right culture fit for you. I sometimes get annoyed. This is sort of a rant. Occasionally on LinkedIn, there'll be some business owner that writes a message of like, we don't want 9 to 5 people. We want people who work weekends and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And people get angry. I would not want to work for an organization like that, right? But I see people getting angry and I'm like, they're being honest about their company culture. Some people love that. Some people love that drive and they want to do it. Would you not rather they be honest about what type of people they're looking for? Now, listen, I don't like the fact that they're glorifying it. I don't think that that's a good thing for employees to work under. So I definitely don't agree with that approach. But at least they're being honest and not sneaky about, we love work-life balance here. And then you'll end up being there 9 to 10 p.m. every night. No, you know what you're getting when you go there.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, it's a bit of a self-own, right? Which is like, okay, is that, and for some people, exactly right. Like that might be the company culture they're working for. For me, it's funny. You're saying like, I have an obligation that I would need to do that I can't work late. I just get tired. I'm up at like 5 a.m. and I'm doing I'm going to swim in the morning and then I'm working from my normal hours and then I'm done. And then I don't have any more energy. You're not going to get any good design out of me, honestly, after like 4 p.m. If I'm being really honest, like that's like, I am tired. I'm done. Hit me up at like 8 a.m. and I'll be great. Right.
Yeah.
But there was a time in my life where like I was kind of into the hustle, and God, I cringe saying that out loud. But I think like when I was in like my early advertising days, we pulled all nighters, and you know what? I was in my 20s and we had a great time.
Yeah.
We were like in the trenches together, working on pitches and like waiting for PDFs to render because that
Totally.
was this thing to do.
Yeah.
And it was a really formative experience. But I'm so thankful that I don't have to, that isn't my life anymore, because I don't have that. I'm just not, I'm not that interested. And beyond that, not that I'm not that interested, it's not going to be good work product from me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think, like, let's all just be honest about everything that we want, and
Yeah.
then you can go where you want to go.
I mean, I
Sometimes, though,
will
I think.
say,
Sorry, go on.
well, I mean, I think, like, if I say, okay, if I just want to be honest, then, oh yeah, I want to do work and get paid for it. I want the most money possible for just doing the work that I love. Like, that's, and I think, like, that level of honesty, I don't think you need to have that.
There's a time
Like
and a
when you're
place.
interviewing for a job. Like, what motivates you to work? Money in order to pay
Money.
my mortgage, right? So it's like, I think, and that is not an answer that's going to help you in an interview process. And so I think, but what you can say, right? But I think people would do that. And I think other people I know who would encourage that kind of like a true, honest answer. I think that is a baseline thing. That's why we do what we're doing. But I think you can say, like, I am interested in working towards these, developing these particular skills or using these skills for good, or, playing to my strengths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think the interesting thing about well, particularly a design interview process is, well, let's talk about the structure of these interviews, because, as I mentioned before, speaking to someone who interviewed at Apple, they went through like 10 or 11 different interviews. I hear stories from people who they go through 11 interviews and they don't get the job, or they get to the end of the process and they're showing something to the CEO, and the CEO doesn't like something in their portfolio, or they're doing a panel, and 4 out of 5 people on the panel will say yes and 1 will say no. I feel like there are so many different interview processes that it's really, as you mentioned before, it's not one size fits all. You
Right.
really have to get a good understanding about what this process is going to be like. And to your point before, if the company can't articulate that or set up expectations properly, that is a very bad sign. Because I mentioned Meta before. I Meta and a couple of other companies where I've interviewed, I knew exactly what was going to happen, because
Yeah.
they said, like, first we're going to do this, then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And I'd be
Mhm.
like, okay, great, I know what's
Yeah.
happening. But so many companies just shoot themselves in the foot, I think, because they don't get back to those people. They add 3 more rounds or whatever. And it just feels like they're flying by the seat of their pants in the way that they do
Yeah.
these things.
I mean, things can change in the course of an interview process, right?
Sure.
And the job may change, or maybe you have 2 recs open and then you only have 1 rec open, and you think that this candidate might be good, so you want to tack on some other interviews or people. As long as you are clear about why that's happening, or why why the expectations have changed, or why the process has changed, I think it's totally fine and totally reasonable. So I had an experience where I was applying for somewhere. There were 2 recs open. I really wanted one of them. I was not interested in the other one. And in the course of the interview process, the one I was really interested in closed, and they wanted to keep me going on this other rec for that I was interested in. And I pulled out, and I said, and they were like, "Oh, why, we really like you." And I was like, "Thank you. That's very flattering and wonderful. I really like the company, but I know that I'm not going to be good at that job."
Yeah.
And I was good for the other job that you filled, but I'm not going to be good at that job. So I don't want to let someone else have that.
Yeah.
And again, speaking from an absolute point of privilege that I was able to turn down that job, but I knew that I wasn't going to be at that company the next year, because, that wasn't the job for me. And when something happens like the CEO coming in, and I've heard those stories too, a ton where it's like you go through all the panels, then that's indicative of that company culture, right? That it doesn't matter what all the other levels and all the other processes say. If the CEO can come in and squash it, then that's what the work is going to be like too.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like you have an audience of 1, but you may have a process of 20, and that's just awful. And it's like, oh, good, you saved yourself that. And
Yeah.
on the flip side, if you make it through that CEO interview and you've impressed them, great. You know who the audience is, and they seem to like you. Right.
Yeah.
So it can kind of work out.
even just having this conversation, I have not been on an interview in a long time. So,
Mm,
because I've been the one doing the interviewing, and
yeah.
it's just reminding me of just how bad this process could be and just how frustrating and so on.
Oh,
But
it can.
yeah,
The other thing that really has there's been an uptick in, and I didn't find a good answer to it, and I wished I had, was ghosting. And
yeah, I've heard
and
that so much from people.
right. And I think it
Yeah.
really happens on both sides. And my hypothesis is that because of the pure volume of applicants, and this isn't because the job market is bad. I think it's
Mm,
because the ease of people being able to hit that apply button on LinkedIn, right? And like that they can apply to 20 jobs a day. And there's a pure volume problem on both sides. It's like I'm applying to so many jobs, and like, I've applied to 20 jobs today. I've gotten 2,000 candidates today.
mm,
That not you. It's impossible to tailor a response to individuals, even if they've gotten a bit further down the process. And I think that's terrible. I think
yeah.
that's terrible. So that's why I
Yeah.
definitely am encouraging, like, less, better quality.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for both sides, to be honest. Like yeah. I've just heard from so many people, some who, work at UXCC. I've heard they've been going on interviews and they'll just say like, yeah, I just didn't hear anything from the recruiter after a certain time, or
Yep.
miscommunication between the company and the recruiter. So the company says they want me, but the recruiter hasn't heard, and then there's mismatch about compensation, and there's just like all sorts of just terrible
Mm.
um I guess, yeah, miscommunication going on.
Yeah.
But it sort of leads me to a good question, which is about the market in general. What do you think it's like right now? Because I know over the past few years, I think it's become very normal to say, "Oh, the design job market's terrible. It's terrible. It's
Yeah.
terrible." And
Yeah.
like, I do think it is bad, but in specific ways, like very specific ways. So I think that, as we just mentioned before, there's more scrutiny on people right now.
Mm.
So there are more interviews happening. We're swinging back to that. I also think that there's a lack of junior level jobs, which really worries me.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing and what are you thinking about?
Well, what I'm seeing is what everyone's seeing, right, on LinkedIn,
Yep.
which is like everything is terrible. The sky is falling. The market is bad. Awful, awful, awful. Right. And I don't,
Yep.
and I don't know if that's a self-fulfilling narrative. I don't know what the truth is, because I don't know, like, what is the right metric to measure this.
Yep.
Because I don't think we have a universal metric to, I imagine there's like, some countrywide unemployment rates and things like that. But in terms of like what we are generally responding to is what we're seeing anecdotally on LinkedIn. And as I said before, people who post on LinkedIn are posting for a reason, and often are posting the kind of not outrage bait, but like I don't know, they're looking for something, they're looking for connection, they're looking for empathy, they are venting, they're trying a different angle, but we're not seeing a lot of people talking about, their successes. And often,
Mm,
if they are talking about their successes, they're doing it like, I succeeded and you can too by signing up for my 12-hour program. So it's like, what are they selling? So I don't have a really good sense of what the market is. And so, like,
yeah.
anecdotally, what I see the same things. But then what I
Yeah.
hear and what I see, people are getting jobs, and there
Yeah.
is hope out there, and they are having interesting conversations, and they
Mm,
are making connections. I Sometimes an interview process might be normal, and you don't really report on the normal thing, right? Oh, I
yeah.
had a screening interview, and then I showed my portfolio, and then there was a panel, and then some one-on-ones, and then I got the job. Like, it's a
Yeah.
boring story to tell. Like, that's how it should go. And I don't think you hear that because it's not an interesting story to tell.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably better than we think.
Yeah.
It's certainly better than we're perceiving.
Yeah.
And I think that going into it with, I don't know, with optimism, with enthusiasm, with genuine curiosity, and a seeking connection, can make it a better experience for both sides, for both candidates and hiring managers.
Yeah. I agree. Listen, we've blown past that time, mostly due to technical issues on my side. I want to end with this.
Good. Yeah.
In the spirit of your book, I want to ask you, what is something that every candidate should be asking their interviewer, and what is something that every interviewer should be asking their candidate?
Oh, the core question. I feel like it's the same question, and I feel like I'm going to be somewhat inarticulate in asking it, but it's ultimately the question about what are you here for? Like, what are you really good at? What is it that drives you to do what you do? What is the thing you do in your job that makes you excited to do it, right? What is the thing that makes time pass where you're in the zone? What is it that inspires you the most about the job and the design that you do? And I think that question for either side can be incredibly revelatory about what it is like to work there and what a candidate is really, really strong at.
Yeah.
So it's really about kind of being authentic and being true about what it is that motivates people and what it is that keeps people going.
Yeah. I had someone ask me once, you know how you get some people ask, like, what does success in this role look like?
Yeah.
And it's a fairly good question to ask. Someone asked me, and this is for UXCC when I was interviewing someone, they said, what does your life look like in 3 months if I'm good at my job?
That's cool.
Like that, I have never heard someone ask it that way before.
Yeah.
I when I was interviewing, I always like to ask, what is the feedback process like? And do people know where they stand here? Because one thing I cannot abide by is not knowing where people stand, where people think that they're doing a good job and they're not, or they're not doing a good job and that people think that they are. When MYOB moved to monthly performance reviews, I was ecstatic because I was like, I know exactly where I stand. I know everything that's going on. I don't know, personally, to me, I think it goes to the whole psychological safety thing. Like if I want to know where I am at all times. So that's something that I like asking, but that's just me.
And that's what you need to know in order to like succeed at your job. Like, right. And that is totally reasonable. Totally reasonable.
Yeah. I like that coach relationship where it's like, I get motivated by people saying like, hey, pull up your game. You know, I'm like, thank you for being honest with me. You know, like I'm gonna, do better or whatever. But anyway, we could go on and on about this because this is like something that everyone needs to know. But I really enjoyed this book. I guess it's technically 2 books. So
it's 2 books. It's 2 books in one.
It is, yeah. So I would highly recommend people get it. Where can people get the book and where can people find you online?
Yes, get the book directly from me at sternlyworded.com. And if you're in the US, that's easiest. If you're outside the US, check with your local large bookseller and it likely can be printed on demand. So your Amazons or your bookshops, places like that. But you can generally find me online through sternlyworded.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Margo Stern. I'm not big on Blue Sky and those things yet. I miss Twitter terribly, but those are the places to find me.
Excellent. Margo, thank you so much for
Thanks, Patrick.
joining the podcast and talking about your book.
Of course.
All right, that was my interview with Margo Stern, author of the book Good Job. Would highly recommend you pick this up. It's a fantastic resource for anyone undergoing both a design interview process, and anyone who's designing an interview process. So would highly recommend you check that out. Thank you for listening. As always, head over to uxcontent.com. You'll get 20% off courses and workshops with Podcast 20, and I'll see you next time.